morning of 16 December of 44, everybody heard artillery firing in the distance. We didn't know what was going on. We couldn't find out too much. Finally, on the 17th, the next day, Brigadier General that was the executive officer for the 30th Infantry Division told us to get down to the different ordnance depots and take anything we want and be ready to roll. Well, we thought, oh boy, we're going to get new tanks. Well, we got to the ordnance depots and the ordnance troops had left. They had bugged out because they heard the Germans were coming, so they took off to the rear, by the way. So we walked in there and found all their tools and everything there. So the trouble was all the tanks were pretty well beat up. They had been shot up and what have you. And so we had to take parts off of the different tanks and put them on something that we thought we could salvage. So what happened was we ended up with 2 Sherman tanks that were usable, but without radios and without gun sights. And we had an M36 tank destroyer with a 90mm gun on it, with no gun sights and no radios. That's the things that they all grabbed as soon as they could. So anyway, we reported that we had 2 tanks and 1 tank destroyer, and just piecemeal everything else. So you had a 1 or 2 M8 armored cars, and we had, of course, Jeeps and trucks. And we had an M7 armored artillery vehicle that had a 105, 105 on it. And then they said, well, take what you got and go down to the railroad station at the town of Stoumont, Belgium. So we went down there and approaching this road where the train station was on, we got the word that the 1st SS Panzer Division, Adolf Hitler, was approaching us. And we got the word that the parts of the 30th Infantry Division were lying in the ditches next to the road. And so the first tank went around this big curve very slowly, because you never go around any corners or circles, anything. You never go fast, because you always got to keep your eye open to see if there's an anti-tank gun somewhere or another tank sitting there just waiting you to come into their view. They can fire around.
What was your exact position like when you're in the tank? Like, what's your exact? Are you like the driver? Or are you the?
Well, I had replaced a guy who had come down with hepatitis, and our battalion commander had come down with hepatitis. He was supposed to go to North Africa during the invasion there, and he went to England. They sent him back to Arizona, and then he got well and took over our battalion. But I had replaced a guy that was in the assault gun platoon, and the assault gun platoon had Sherman tanks with the 105, and all the other tanks had 75s or later on 76s. And so he was approaching very slow around the corner. He came face to face with the lead tank of the 1st SS Panzer Division. He fired and knocked out that Panther. And he started to reload, but the round got stuck. So he motioned for the second tank to come around. And he came around and faced the second tank of the German SS 1st Panzer. And he fired and he knocked that tank out. Well, then the next one was the M36 tank destroyer. He came around and he put 3 rounds real fast of 90mm into the 3rd tank, Panther, and knocked it out. So the 1st SS Panzer Division turned tail and retreated. So the infantry of the 30th Infantry Division were happy as hell, because they thought they were going to be killed for sure with all this division coming their way. And so anyway, later on, the 1st SS found another road into the town of Stoumont. and had a heck of a fight with them there. They had a real infantry fight at a backyard of a home called the Brown House. It's called Brown House because half of it was brown and the other half of it was white, and it's still painted that same color and it's still there. But anyway, another section of the 1st SS Panzer Division found out that there was a what they called what was that term they used? I can't remember. They didn't use the term hospital, but it was a hospital. And it's part of the 30th Infantry Division. Guys were holed up in that thing and they couldn't get out. And the reason they couldn't get out is the Germans had a Panther tank sitting at the end of the building, and the building was a long, narrow building. And he had his 76 actually gun pointed right down that hallway. So every time the infantryman tried to get out in the hall to get out of there, he'd fire around down there and scare the devil out of them. So they had to stay put. So we tried to get this Panther tank, but it was sitting up on a hill right in the center of town. And the main road came through, but then it was up on a hill, and the Panther was sitting right at the end of the building. And he could fire down, and he knocked out a couple of our tanks and knocked the turrets off of them. And so we couldn't get our tanks to a point where we could fire up at him. So we had to wait till it got dark. And then we built what we called a corduroy road. And they kept building this road up at an angle so that by 6 o'clock in the morning, they got to the top. And apparently the German crew of the tank was asleep because they didn't even know we were coming up there. Knocked out the Panther tank there and freed these infantrymen again. And we just happened to go in the basement. I don't know why we did it, but we were looking the building over. Got down in the basement, and there was 92 old folks and kids, little kids. And a Catholic priest was there, and he was keeping these people quiet all the time that tank sat out there. And had the Germans known that they were there, they would have come down and machine gunned every one of them. 1st SS Panzer Division was known for killing people just because they're there. No reason, just because they're standing somewhere. So those people were mighty glad to see us. And you know, the funny thing was, the people who owned those kids, the parents, they started teaching their kids in school. Whenever you see an American, you shake his hand and you tell him, "Thank you for my liberation. Thank you for my freedom." And I want to tell you something. When that happened to us the first time, there was not a dry eye in that bunch. And they still do it. If I went over there today, they would still do it. I was there in May and June of this year, and they still do it. And even had a girl that was about, probably 20 years old, maybe 21 or so, real pretty girl, walked up to me and pretty as she could be, put her hand out and thanked me for her liberation. And I grabbed her and I hugged her and I said, "Well, thank you." I said, "You don't know what that does to me to see that." And it still gets to me, believe me, because you know, they still teach their kids to say that to us when we're over there. And it's just a very nice thing for us to hear. You don't hear it here in this country. You never hear it here. But they'll thank you for your service, but they'll never say anything about my liberation or my freedom. Anyway, let's see, where was I? Okay, so we finally knocked out the Panther tank at that building. And then the next battle was in the next town, which was Gliese. And that's L-A, then space Gleize. The other town was Stoumont, Stoumont. And Gliese had the bulk of the 1st SS Panzer Division in there, and they were tearing up things. and capturing some of the 30th Division troops. And so our battalion commander had RCP set up in a chateau, which was on the outskirts of the town of Stumont. And he had our assault gun tanks lined up. And he saw a second lieutenant and his crew of a 155 Long Tom. I guess you knew what that was. That was on a vehicle. It was on a Sherman tank chassis, but it was built a little different. It had this humongous long tube on it for a 155. And he saw this guy bugging out, and he sent his driver down to tell him to stop. And they said, "You see that lieutenant colonel standing up there looking down here?" And the second lieutenant said, "Yeah." And he says, "He just told me to come down here and tell you to get your behind up here as fast as you can, and or you're going to be court-martialed and or shot right here." So the lieutenant brought his Long Tom up. They set it up, and they jointly fired with our 105s into the town of L'Église and flattened the town. But it stopped the first SS Panzer, and they never got any further. This was on the north shoulder of the Bulge. A lot of little towns before we got to the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line, I guess you know what that is, don't you? Okay. You know what the things are they call sticking up out of the ground, they call them dragon's teeth. Well, that's just part of the Siegfried Line. A lot of people think that is the Siegfried Line, but it's only part of it. Beyond that, and mixed in with those teeth, they had barbed wire and bombs that they could set off electronically. And they were stretched out all along the border from the North Sea all the way down to Swiss border. And behind that, after you got through the dragon's teeth, we could go over the top of them by using a bulldozer or a tank dozer and pushing dirt over them. We could drive tanks right over them. So they didn't stop us for any length of time. The problem was on the other side, there were bunkers there that were in concrete, reinforced concrete buildings that were anywhere from 3 to 8 feet thick, and just an embrasure in the front for a tube to stick out, and they could shoot at you, and they were hard to hit. And the best way to hit them, if you could, is get around into that brazier, and if you could do that, it would explode inside and kill all of them. Well, it was hellacious because we had guns, of course, on our tanks, but to get in close enough where you could fire at them, you had to get pretty close to try, because we were trying to hit them through these embrasures, holes in the concrete for their tube to stick out. And we had to try to put around in between the tube and the edge of the embrasure, the hole. And that was difficult to do. A lot of it was having to be done by the infantrymen, where they could get in and get underneath the front of the thing and throw either a satchel charge in or a hand grenade. And many times they could get around the back of the bunker, and there was a steel door there, and they'd bang on the door and tell the guys to come out. If they wouldn't come out, why, they would have another tank dozer come over and push dirt on the door so that they couldn't come out. So they had to die on there, or whatever happened. We don't know. But the infantry did most of the dirty work. We gave them artillery support with what they were doing. So anyway, after we got through with that, we went back up to the Rhine River and went up the west side to the town of Bonn, B-O-N-N, which was later on the capital of West Germany, until we got the Russians out of Berlin. And we crossed the Rhine River and made the Ruhr Pocket Battle. The Ruhr Pocket Battle was many units that were across the Rhine. They made a big sweeping curve and ended up, in the Ruhr area. And we were there for 2 weeks. We got to clean up, take showers, clean up all our vehicles. It was something we had to do. They had been treated pretty badly all those months. So anyway, they ordered us up to the town of Lakita on the Elbe River, ELBE, but it's pronounced Elbe. And we got there, and General Matthew Ridgway was standing there raising Cane with the engineers to get a bridge built across the Elbe. We had orders to go up to the north where the British were and give them a hand. We couldn't figure out why that was necessary, because they never needed help before. Why do they need it now? So we never got an answer until many, many years later. We found out the reason they sent us up there was because they wanted to put a show of force so that the Russians wouldn't try to come across and take Denmark. So anyway, we were going like the devil. We finally got across the Elbe River, and we turned left and went north. And with the 82nd Airborne again and the 8th Infantry Division. And we got to the town of Ludwigslust. And Ludwigslust is right on the Elbe. And so they dropped off, and there was a concentration camp after Ludwigslust between the town of Ludwigslust and the town of Wobbelin. And the concentration camp was named Wobbelin Concentration Camp. WOBBLIN, I believe it was. So we knocked down a few of the fences for the 82nd Airborne, and then we kept yelling, "Get going, get going." So everything was rush, 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 go, 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 keep going, keep moving. And then later on, I got to see Dachau. And after that, I got to see the town of Hadamar, which was a quote hospital, but it was more of a killing hospital. And it was not something I'm proud of seeing. But anyway, we made it on up the road and passed an air base, a German air base. And our gunners started taking bets on who could knock down an airplane before they got just off the ground. And our gunners were really great. They'd let the airplane run down the runway there, and just as it lifted, it hit it and blew it out of the sky. And that was another thing we enjoyed seeing. I mean, we had fun doing that. And everybody was so anxious because it was Hitler had killed himself on April 30th. April 30th, I didn't see one person crying, but we were glad to hear that he was gone. So we made it up to the town of Schwerin, Schwerin, I believe it is. And it's right on the Baltic. And we met the British there. And they couldn't figure out why we were there, and we couldn't figure out why we were there. But anyway, the war ended on May 8th. And they had ceremonies and, a few handshakes and maybe a slap on the back every now and then from somebody, but we were just bone tired. We'd been doing nothing but just running fast and furious for the last month. And so we were just, everybody just sat down and fell asleep. And some of us just slept for days. But anyway, I came back to the States and re-enlisted and went to Japan. Supposed to go to the 1st Cavalry Division in Japan. I got there in November, December of 48. And was supposed to go to 1st Cav. So they had us sitting in a theater there, being oriented on what they expect in Japan. And they called my name out, told me to go back in the back of the theater and see some guy there. So I did, and he said, "How would you like to go to MacArthur's headquarters in Tokyo?" Hey, maybe that sounds good. I said, "Won't have to be digging holes in the ground anymore. Won't have to be greasing tanks. Be able to eat real food with tablecloths, sleep in beds with sheets. I'll take it." So I reported in to what they call GHQ in Tokyo, MacArthur's headquarters. And they told me what they wanted me to do is they wanted me to be the crew chief. I said, what's a crew chief? I knew what a crew chief was in the Air Force, but I didn't know what it was in the Army. They said, well, you'll be in charge of a group of communicators that when MacArthur wants to go somewhere, you go ahead of him and set up communications so that he can keep in contact with Tokyo and the Pentagon. The Korean War started in 1950. And of course, I got involved with that real fast because MacArthur, every time he went to Korea, we went ahead of him, set up communications. Then when he left, we tore him down and went back to Tokyo. And people have asked me, well, where were you at in Korea? Well, I've never been able to tell them because we would land at an airfield and all the airfields were numbered. They didn't have a name like they do here in this country. I can remember 52, I think it was one of them that we went to. And I couldn't tell you what town it was near or anything. They put us at the end of the runway and there we sat until MacArthur left, and then we left. So then when MacArthur was relieved of duty, well, my time was up, so I got to go home just about the same time that he did. And of course, I went back on a cattle ship rather than an airplane. He went back on his airplane. So then I got back to the station. I was assigned to Army Security Agency, and they sent me back to Europe. And I got out. I got so disgusted with that outfit, I volunteered to go back to Korea in the infantry or in armor. They wouldn't let me go because of my security clearances. They were afraid if I got caught, they'd be able to get information out of me, and it probably would be true. But anyway, I had a end of a hitch coming up, so I came back to the States, and I got out of the Army and went to the Air Force. I couldn't get out of that outfit any other way except by getting out of the Army. So I went to the Air Force. I walked in and put my hand up and said, I do. And they said, what did you do in the Army? And I told them. And I was doing strictly classified work. Everything was classified work. It was really something. And so I told them what I did, and I said, yeah, we'll take you. And I said, well, how about rank? I was a tech sergeant at the time, or now what they call an E7, I don't know, or E6, I guess they call it now. I don't know. Anyway, so I got my rank back and went home, changed clothes, took off my Army uniform, put on Air Force, went to work, and went back to Germany, spent a great tour over there, doing all classified work, doing a lot of trips, inspecting communications facilities. And then when that tour was over, I came back to the States, went to the Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska. And they call it SAC. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not. But we had all the ICBMs out in the Midwest, all pointed toward Russia, of course, and other places. And I had to go over to Vietnam two, 3 times and doing some classified work over there. Never got credit for being in Vietnam as far as a medal for it, because you had to be there for 30 days straight before you could get a medal for it. But that satisfied me fine. I didn't care about the medals. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to be. I didn't like that place. There's too many bugs and animals and things they had over there. I didn't need any part of that. So I came back and I retired in January of 1966.